Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Corcoran. For those of you who haven't met me yet, I use she, her pronouns. I am in northeastern Pennsylvania and on Lenni Lenape land. And this evening, we have a special guest speaker for our Equity in the Outdoors Open Discussion Series. We have had multiple topics throughout the season, and I understand that sometimes it can be harder to get together for these conversations in the summertime with everyone's busy schedule. So we're going to make this call a little bit shorter than we normally do, but we will still have that time for open discussion at the end. And we will be pushing back our call next month. So we will not be having an equity call in August. You can take the month off. You can enjoy the rest of your summer, and then we'll be coming back in September for another guest speaker. So tech stuff really quick. The rest of our facilitators aren't on the call this evening. It's a one-man or a one-person show, I should say. Meredith, who is normally one of our co-facilitators, just had a baby. So that's a big life change. Amy is on vacation, as is Randy, and Callie is spending some time on herself this month. So it's just me. And if you look at this screen, which shows all of our facilitators, you'll see a mute and a stop video button on the bottom of that screen. If you aren't familiar with Zoom, those are going to be your best friends, as well as the chat button, which is going to be down in the middle of the bottom. You will also see a little CC button. If you want to enable closed captioning, you can do that at this time. The recording, when I send it out afterwards, will have a live transcript on it. So if you want to watch the video with transcription, you can do that. Otherwise, you can turn that off. I'll have a video that won't have the transcription as well. So we will go on to the next slide. Our community agreements. These are the same for all of our open discussions. I realize that some of the topics that we have discussed in the past can be a little bit difficult for people, at least in the beginning. So one of the ones that I like to highlight the most is it's okay to be raggedy when you're trying to speak and think through these thoughts, possibly for the first time. It might not come out quite the way that you thought it would, or it might come out a little bit in spurts and pieces. That's okay. That's part of the reason we're having these discussions, so that way we can learn more about ourselves, learn more about others, and figure this all out together. Another really big community agreement that we like to flag is ouch, oops. Sometimes when you're being raggedy, things don't come out quite the way you wanted them to, and they might accidentally hurt someone. So if that's the case and somebody calls you out on it or calls you in on it, just apologize and we'll move forward from there. So we do have a guest speaker this evening. I will not be speaking the entire evening, which is a nice change. Jacky Osfield from the National Outdoors for All campaign is joining us this evening. And I'm gonna turn it over to her.
Great, thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks for the invitation. And I am really excited to be here with you all tonight and share with you a little bit about the Outdoors for All campaign and really hopefully be in conversation with y'all. So thank you. Thanks for sharing your evening with me. And Sarah, we can go to the next slide. I'll just introduce myself real quickly. My name is Jacky Osfield. I use she, her pronouns, and I direct the Outdoors for All campaign. I am based in Washington, D.C. on Necoshank and Anacostan lands, but I grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania, and love every chance I get to talk to Pennsylvania folks. So thank you. You're my people. I spent about 17 years of my life in Pennsylvania. I've been with the Sierra Club for over 10 years. And prior to my work with Sierra Club, I was doing a lot of environmental education work in the field. I lived out in California for a couple of years and a couple other places where I was got to spend my days taking kids on outings, taking kids on hikes, teaching them about local ecosystems and local conservation issues. And my years as an environmental educator really opened my eyes to two things. One is just how impactful being outdoors is for children's development, but also how many kids there were that didn't have those opportunities regularly. And while I loved that work, I did burn out on that work after a couple of years and wanted to think about how I could approach the work in a different way. And so that's when I moved to Washington, D.C. to study environmental policy, and got so lucky to land this incredible job with the Sierra Club as our first national youth representative, where I got to work on environmental education policy. And so marrying my real desire to make sure that I was getting kids outdoors with doing the work from a policy lens that didn't burn me out in the same way, though truth told, it's burning me out in a very different way the last couple of years in particular. But so fast forward about a decade, and I am now I have this distinct honor of getting to lead the Outdoors for All campaign and working with Sarah and really helping to make sure that more and more people have opportunities to get outdoors and improve their health and well-being. And I've known for a while, I'm sure many of you on the call have known for a while, just how critical the outdoors is to our own mental health. There's nothing like living through a pandemic to really help you appreciate how critical public lands are to our overall well-being. This is a picture of me and my two young boys. I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old who may interrupt at any moment. I apologize in advance. Hopefully not. They're watching TV, so they're pretty excited about that. But if we weren't able to get out and find places to get outside, I don't know how we would have managed through this last year. Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide, I'd say just if we learn anything living in isolation, it's just really how important our not just the outdoors, but our nearby parks and open spaces are for mental and physical health. We know that time in nature reduces stress. It improves mental, physical, and emotional health at the individual level. But we also know that public parks and community green spaces help to strengthen societal cohesion and support the overall wellness of whole communities. And while some of the work we do is more immersive, so an immersive experience in nature can really serve as adjunct therapy for individuals, especially folks who are experiencing post-traumatic stress. We've done a lot of this work with the veteran population. But science also tells us that just 2 hours of nature each week can significantly improve our overall mental health. But the reality is that nature is not universal. Access to nature is not universal. And Black, Latinx, and Asian communities are 3 times more likely than white communities to live in neighborhoods with limited nature access. And there's about 100 million people in the United States, including 28 million children, that do not have a park within a half mile of their home. These numbers are staggering. I'll also just share this graphic if folks haven't seen it. This is from a new New York Times article that just came out maybe last week or 2 weeks ago that showed the tree equity gap in our major cities and how there's a gap between a link between how much money, how much wealth is in a community and how much tree canopy they have. This picture, I believe, is from Baltimore, but it's emblematic of many cities across the country, of our larger cities, and just who has nature and who doesn't. And so these numbers, these images are pretty staggering, and they're the result of, in part, of racist and discriminatory land use policies and practices, from forced migration to redlining to economic segregation, that have shaped our communities and left a legacy of inequity when it comes to many basic services, including but not limited to access to parks and green spaces and all the associated health benefits that come from that. And, I think folks know, but that the pandemic has only exacerbated these inequities, with many local parks, playgrounds, and also youth and community serving programs like our very own Outings, ICO programs, and other programs having to close down early on in the pandemic due to fears around public safety. We also know, of course, that low-income communities and communities of color are on the front lines of the climate crisis, most likely to suffer the consequences of environmental destruction, such as air and water pollution. and most likely to feel the impacts of the climate crisis, like flooding and storm damage. And a lack of green space in our cities also contributes to the urban heat island effect, with higher temperatures can increase the risk of heat-related illnesses such as heat stroke or heat stress and even death. And I don't know if folks saw, but just last year, just exactly a year ago, there was a study that was published that found that planting trees, meeting Philadelphia's goals for a tree canopy, could prevent 400 premature deaths every year. And so just to put a little, to demonstrate how serious it is for folks to not have green space and access to trees in their neighborhoods. It's pretty staggering, and the disparity in access to nature, and also all those links to public health. So we kind of refer to this overall, we're referring to this as this nature equity gap that we're trying to solve. Sarah, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about our campaign. So Sierra Club's Outdoors for All campaign, this is what we're set up to focus on. We are working to reduce the barriers and expand access to nature for all people. We believe that access to nature, such as public parks and open spaces, should be respected as a basic human right. We also acknowledge that barriers to entry are extensive. They go well beyond just having that physical park in your neighborhood, but they include the legacy of systemic racism that has and continues to shape land use policies and our attitudes. And we want to acknowledge the barriers, including those presented by racism, misogyny, and bigotry, and work to overcome them by expanding just and equitable access to nature. So next slide, I'll share a little bit about how we're doing that. So we have some overarching campaign outcomes for the Outdoors for All campaign. And the first is we want to make sure that our public lands are welcoming and inclusive for Black, Indigenous, people of color, and other communities with marginalized identities. We want people to go to their parks and feel safe, physically and emotionally. We want to make sure that equitable access to nearby nature is increasing by protecting, expanding, or activating connections to public lands. And by activating, I mean things like programming. This picture is a picture from our Detroit Outdoors program, where we have activated the city's only urban campground and are training youth leaders, ICO leaders, Inspiring Connections Outdoors for folks who aren't familiar with that acronym. That's our youth outings program of the Sierra Club, and partner organizations like the YMCA in being able to safely take kids camping in their own backyard. We're also interested in making sure that all children and youth have universal access to parks and public lands and opportunities to learn about nature. And we're working to ensure that veterans and military families are connected to public lands and have opportunities to heal in the outdoors. So next slide. So just to give a couple of examples of how we're working to advance these goals legislatively or through policy. It's been, the last couple of years have been challenging. I'll say that our campaign has still been able to have some success. Even during the last 4 years of the Trump administration, we were able to pass the Every Kid Outdoors Act, which allows all fourth graders and their families to access public lands like national parks for free. So we were able to have some success. And now where we have a friendlier administration to our issues, and Congress who's looking to do stuff, looking to move. We have a lot of pretty ambitious goals for the campaign. We're looking to pass several bills that are related to closing the nature equity gap. I'll just share a couple examples. Transit to Trails would create funding for local public transit agencies to create transportation connectors, public buses to trailheads, that sort of thing, with a focus on communities that have limited access to nature. We're working to pass the Parks, Jobs, and Equity Act as part of this big budget reconciliation process that's going on right now to try to put $500 million into park equity programs in cities and towns across the country. We're hoping to see a bold and ambitious and modern civilian climate corps that can put young people and veterans to work protecting our public lands, increasing access to nature through things like planting trees in cities, and also doing some of our, helping to usher in a clean energy economy. And so there's a couple of examples, and at the state level, we work with chapters to do similar work. And so in New York, we work with the Atlantic chapter. We just we recently, about a year ago, we passed the Outdoor RX bill to create a task force across the state of New York to assess how veterans can better access public lands. And so we are now serving on the task force and just released a report, a couple 100-page report on what the state of New York needs to do to make sure that people can get outdoors. We're working with the Wisconsin chapter to expand the Every Kid Outdoors program to state parks throughout Wisconsin. Working on public transit projects in Los Angeles and a restorative justice project in Stone Mountain Park in Georgia. So next slide, Sarah. And so that's kind of some of the things at the federal and state level that we're working to achieve. And then I'll say, in addition to those campaign outcomes, we hold equal value how we achieve those outcomes and how we build power to win. So one of our big power building, movement building goals for the campaign is how do we create a greater intersection between outings and advocacy, which is something that the Pennsylvania chapter just does so well. It's like a model for the country and how to make that seamless, but it's not the case in everywhere across the Sierra Club that we're seamlessly integrating outings in our advocacy work. But so we're trying to engage a powerful and diverse core base through campaign connected outings and through online activities. We look to empower advocates as leaders through training and by providing clear opportunities to engage in campaign activities. And we're looking more and more to support and collaborate with Sierra Club chapters and groups to advance the state and our locally driven campaigns to help close the nature equity gap. Next slide. And then the other way that we're building power is really through partnerships. We want to make sure that we're building strong coalitions, we're building transformational partnerships. We're guided by the HEMES principles and working with BIPOC-led organizations and partners who are at the forefront of dismantling racism in the outdoors and trying to close that nature equity gap. So we have partnerships at the national level, we have partnerships at the local level. I mentioned Detroit before. We work with many organizations in Detroit as part of our Detroit Outdoors Initiative that works with the YMCA, the Parks and Rec Department, a coalition of BIPOC organizations called Black to the Land that's working to reconnect Black folks to nature around that project. We also run the Outdoors Alliance for Kids, which is a partnership of 100+ organizations working to advocate for federal legislation to close the nature equity gap, and many other partners. So let's go to the next slide and I'll just share a couple examples and then we can jump into discussion. I just want to share a little bit about how this plays out on the ground. So here's an example in Los Angeles. And, for more than a decade, our team has worked in collaboration with the Angeles chapter, the Nature for All Coalition, used to be called the San Gabriel Mountains Forever Coalition, if you follow any LA stuff, and many community and environmental justice partners to come up with a community-driven vision for the San Gabriel Mountains, which is a couple 100,000 acres in the Angeles National Forest right outside of Los Angeles. It's the backyard of millions of people, and it's one of the few open spaces available to people living in Los Angeles, particularly Latinx and Pacific Asian Islander communities. And we worked collaboratively to develop this plan. We were able to get the San Gabriels established as a national monument during President Obama's tenure, and have worked on the management plans, trying to embed equity into those plans, things like bilingual signage and other types of interventions through the management plan that would make the parks and spaces more accessible. But the one piece that was always missing was, how do people get there? There's so many people, particularly low-income communities in Los Angeles, who don't have cars, don't have a way to get to the mountains. And we wanted to make sure that having a car wasn't what was required to experience public lands. We're, as a Sierra Club, we'd also like to limit limit the amount of cars on the road, or, we're switching to electric cars and trying to really promote public transportation. And so we want to make sure that you don't, like, having a car isn't the thing that you need to be able to get outdoors. It just feels very inequitable. And so the coalition down in Los Angeles is working with the LA Transit Authority and many partners with Congress, with their local members of Congress, to map out a plan and try to get funding, a plan to put transportation lines into various points along the mountains that can be accessed for more people. And so over the years, we've used Outings, we've developed leaders, we invest in partnerships, we do public education and advocacy. All of those pieces working really well together to build a very strong power to win, hopefully. We're still trying to get this over the finish line, but to get these transit lines in place that will allow more people to visit their parks. So I'll just share one more example, Sarah, the next slide. And this is a newer example. Last year, or just maybe in the last couple of years, here at the national campaign level, we worked across the Sierra Club to develop a national position opposing Confederate monuments and memorials, and that was adopted as an official Sierra Club position last year. We want to recognize that symbols of the Confederacy and other racist and derogatory symbols do create real barriers for people to feel safe and welcome in our parks and public lands. And there are so many of these across the country. But Stone Mountain Park, if you haven't heard of it, it's the largest memorial to the Confederacy in the world. It's a shrine to white supremacy. It's where the KKK got started and still regularly go. And when we developed this position as a national organization, we heard immediately from the Georgia chapter wanting to flag this local issue that has very much national significance. I don't know why I can't say that word tonight, and asked for help from the campaign. And so for the last several months, we have assembled a small team of national and chapter staff and volunteers to really assess the need, to communicate with partners on the ground that are at the forefront of the work. Many organizations are involved, including the Georgia NAACP, and chart a path forward for how the Sierra Club could officially add restorative justice in the park to its official agenda. We just got this approved by the XCOM about 3 weeks ago and are cleared to move forward, which is really exciting. This is very new work for us. And, prior to making this decision, we had been, as a chapter, we had been leading outings there for many, many years. It is one of the few really beautiful natural areas close to Atlanta, and we do a lot of outings there. And it's always been this weird tension, like, why are we taking people to this Confederate memorial? Even though there are many parts of the park where you can go and not see any of this symbol, these markers or monuments, there's still there's Confederate flags, there's street names and buildings and other features that are named after Confederates, and also in KKK figures. And so we are just beginning to get started here, but we're working with the Stone Mountain Action Coalition and really practicing the HEMIS principles and making sure that we're following the lead of the coalition, looking to amplify local partners and thinking about how we can lead more outings here as outings are starting to reopen. How can we raise awareness and build a base of supporters and leaders for the broader coalition's efforts? And there'll probably be some lobby components. We're trying to make sure that, state tax dollars aren't going to support this park as it stands, and making sure that there are forums for community members and people most impacted by this park to be able to weigh in on what the future of this park should look like. So that's just one more example of how the work shows up in different places based on what the community needs are. And Sarah, I'll just close. We can go to the next slide, but I'll just say that as we look to expand the campaign's impact and ensure that the Sierra Club is living our equity values as an organization, it's really important that we're showing up for communities and using the power and resources of the Sierra Club to address and support these community identified needs in our work, and helping to close that nature equity gap for the 100 million people in the US who don't have nearby access to parks and green spaces, or to the many people who don't feel safe or welcome in our parks because there are symbols of hate or something else that is preventing people from feeling safe. And so I also just say, Sarah, I don't know how much folks know about us collaborating in the Pennsylvania chapter, but I'm just really excited that we're starting to work more closely with the Pennsylvania chapter this year than we ever have in the past, and working to bring on our first, for the campaign, our first chapter Outdoors for All organizer in the Pennsylvania chapter to really start addressing the nature equity gap in Philadelphia. And I'm just really thrilled to see how that work plays out in the future and how we can collaborate. So I'll stop there and see if folks have any questions. And then Sarah, I know we wanted to have a little bit of a discussion.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Jackie. If anyone has any questions for Jackie, you can come off mute, or if you would prefer to write them down in the chat instead, I'd be happy to read them out. But this is open question time, if anyone has any questions.
I have a question. Jackie, this is Eric. You mentioned, I'm going to mess up the name, Yemes principles.
Hemes.
Hemes.
Mm-hmm.
Did you define
No.
what those are? Could you please?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And sorry for that's, I guess that's jargon. Yeah, the Hemes principles for democratic organizing are a set of principles that were developed, back in the 90s, I want to say, by a group of organizations of color and folks working on economic justice for how to better interact and guide partnerships. So they are, I'll share what they are, but maybe I'll also try to find a document. Let me see if I can just find it. I'll put it in the chat here. This is pretty easy for me to find. I'll put this in the chat here too, if you want to dive a little bit deeper. But the Hemes principles are: be inclusive, emphasis on bottom-up organizing, let people speak for themselves, work together in solidarity and mutuality, build just relationships among ourselves, and commit to self-transformation. So I don't know how deep I should go into this, Sarah. I also wonder if this is like maybe a topic for a future conversation, because we do whole trainings on the Hemes principles. But basically, it's a set of principles that make sure that we're really centering and lifting up the voices and the needs of communities who are impacted. And how do we, make sure that we are walking our talk in terms of equity and our own personal self-transformations as we do this work around racial equity and justice. It's a set of principles that Sierra Club has committed to. I'm not sure how many years ago, but several years ago. It's a set of principles that we all we adhere to in the partnership work and organizing work that we do.
And I saw in the chat that that David actually posted an article from the Sierra Club website with more about Sierra Club's stance with the Hemes principles. So, but I can send out that information to everyone who registered. I'll get some resources together to share for outside learning opportunities when I send out the recordings.
Thanks,
All right.
Sarah.
Yep, no problem. Any other questions?
I am trying to think of how to phrase it. Well, a couple things. I worked with ICO for a couple of years, and ours was kind of like reorganizing as the pandemic hit, and that effort fell apart. I don't know where it's going now in Philadelphia. But I had a thought. There's so many things that could encourage family participation, and ICO is very the child focused. It was an individual. The family would drop them off. We'd go on the outing. The family would come and pick them up, and there wasn't any family involvement that I could see. It just seems to me, looking at that map of LA with the trailheads and the transit, there are a lot of things that I could picture making that work. Ideally, childcare to help to encourage multi-child single parent families seem to be way too common. Get out to the trailheads, lunches, equipment, aid with transit fares. We were taking people in buses and we were driving them, which we weren't supposed to be doing. And not buses, large vans. And a lot of that part fell apart when, there just wasn't what we were supposed to be doing. So aid with fair and people from ICO going with the families. It just seems like I haven't seen anything happening with making this work nationally, or even getting the chapters tied into the ICO programs. I couldn't see any connection whatsoever between Pennsylvania and our Philadelphia ICO. It may have been there, just not being one of the top leaders, I didn't see it, and I didn't feel it, certainly. So I'm wondering about what's happening on that front.
Well,
Make more families and kids an important focus of Sierra Club activism, and getting more members active. I didn't see a lot of members either showing up.
David, it's really nice to meet you, even though it's digitally. I wish that Amy or Meredith were on the discussion this evening, because both of them are based out of Philadelphia, and I know that they have done work with ICO in the past. On the chapter level, we're really hoping to integrate our outing structure into every facet of our work, and also hold in the ICO groups a little bit more with the local outings program, so that way there's more communication between the leaders. I know in the past ICOs, both Philadelphia and Harrisburg, have kind of done their own thing. And it would be great if we could get more interaction between the local outings leaders and the ICO leaders moving forward. So I'll be reaching out and we can talk. And especially with the new Philadelphia staff person coming in, we'll work on some stuff with that. But I definitely agree. And I'd love to try to think about more ways to incorporate family outings through either ICO or the local outings program.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I love that question. I'll also just share an example with Sarah, I think you know about too, but in New York City, in the Bronx, we have an outings program that is focused on veterans who are single mothers. Largely Black, it's largely a Black community, mostly women who have young children, and the biggest barrier for them to participate was childcare, as I hear you naming. And so we changed up the outings, and now the kids come too. And it's been such an prior to the pandemic, everything is in a little bit of upheaval right now, but it had been such a powerful, impactful program, and the women who come through it are just, I've heard stories of it just like saving their lives, like having this opportunity to be in community with other single mothers who were veterans going through a similar experience. So there's definitely ways to do it to make sure that it's whole family. And, Sarah's better person than me to ask how to figure it out, but just to share that it is happening in other places. So it might be a good place to look as a model.
Sorry, I did not mean to cut you off. Did you have anything else you'd like to say, David, or no?
No.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions before we jump into discussion questions? Okay, then I'm gonna advance the slide. Whoops, I advanced too far.
Great, thanks, Sarah. And I'll just flag that, I put these together just to help guide discussion, but by no means do we have to feel like this is like the set of questions that we need to discuss. Sarah, should I read them off? I don't know if everybody can see them or if some people are on the phone.
It doesn't look like we have anyone on the phone today. So if we'd like, if folks that are listening in today could look through the questions and pick one or two that really resonates with them, one that they'd like to kind of start off with, I I'll open the floor to anyone on the call who may want to read off one of these questions and get us started.
Yeah, there's a question here in the chat that I can try to answer. It's kind of a structure question. So the question is Outdoors for All an umbrella for ICO and similar programs? Yes, yes, and no. Yes. So the Outdoors for All campaign is one of 2 campaigns within the broader Our Wild America campaign, which I did not talk about today, but the Our Wild America campaign is our work to protect public lands, waters, and wildlife, and also to connect all people with the outdoors. Within Outdoors for All, we have several programs that we support. The Military Outdoors Program, the Outdoors Alliance for Kids, Nearby Nature Program, and ICO. But let me also share that ICO is this sort of hybrid program because it also lives within outdoor activities in our outings department. So Mel McInnes is the director of outdoor activities, and that is part of our building grassroots power to win arm of the Sierra Club. So it's not the campaign unit. We have the campaign unit, and then we have grassroots power building unit, and the outdoor activities and outings are within that unit. So it's support for ICO and support for outings comes from that unit. But as we try to raise money as a campaign, so one of the big goals of the campaign is try to raise money. We do raise money for the national ICO structure, and we're going to be actually, I don't want to get ahead of myself and making an announcement, but there will be a new national ICO program person coming on soon that will help support ICOs across the nation. And that position has been vacant for a little while.
And Jackie, correct me if I'm wrong, but there are various funding streams available for ICO groups too. Like with the Every Kid Outdoors program, there's some funding available if ICO groups wanted to take trips to national parks that they'd be able to use the Every Kid Outdoors pass for.
Yeah, so we're getting ready to kick off a couple of opportunities. So we have some restricted money in other parts of our campaign. So we have funders who say you have to use the money for this or that thing. It's rare that we get an unrestricted gift that we can just use for anything, but we do have some funding for Every Kid Outdoors campaign, as Sarah mentioned, and we are very eager to work with ICO programs who are interested in either taking 4th graders out on hikes or in other ways to lift up the program and the visibility of the program. So yes, we have some limited funds available for that, and we'll be putting out some information about that through the ICO listserv in the next couple of weeks. But folks can if you're interested, you can feel free to reach out to me directly about that. So we're going to have some mini grants of up to $500 to support an outing that would help lift up the campaign. And hopefully we'll have other opportunities like that in the future too. If you're interested in using public transit, I know that's a little bit challenging right now with the COVID protocols, but in the future or before COVID, we had planned to try and encourage folks to use public transit to take to outings and take pictures and share them with us and try to lift up that element of the campaign too.
Thinking on some of the discussion questions on this slide, and also thinking about transit that you were just speaking on, the question of what barriers to nature access are present in cities and towns in PA. That one is always a question on my mind, and thinking of ways to break those down. But transit is definitely a huge barrier to access in a good majority of Pennsylvania, not just in the city areas, but in the rural areas as well. If anyone has any ideas or examples of transit barrier or any other type of barrier that they've personally experienced or have thoughts or ideas about, we'd love to hear it. I feel like there isn't as much discussion as we normally have. I know it's a smaller group and it's beautiful out, but let's open up some conversation. I see in the chat, Philly actually leads the state in transit access to nearby nature. Philadelphia is an amazing city. They have all sorts of great city parks that I still need to go and explore. There's a lot of places up here in Northeast Pennsylvania that I haven't had a chance to explore yet, and I've been here for 35 years now. But I do want to come down and check out some of the parks in Philadelphia as well. Fawn is posting in the chat, a barrier for many people, especially families, would be the living wage. Thinking of families or single parents who have to work so much and can't take the kids outdoors or afford to drive to their state parks. Yes, definitely. I mean, we always try to make any of our outings free and open to the public, but just because they're free doesn't mean that everyone will still have the opportunity to attend. If like a good majority of our local outings are on weekends or on Saturdays or Sundays, and if you have to work on the weekends, then you can't attend. Or if you have to worry about childcare because most daycare centers aren't open, you know, in the evenings or on a lot of them on the weekends, then you have to figure out childcare. That I can see that definitely being a barrier, and finding ways to work around that is important. Family-friendly outings are the best. I try to make every outing one that I can bring my son to, just because I'd like to do that. But other folks should have that opportunity as well. Hold on, I advanced the slide somehow. There you go. Back to the questions. Any other thoughts on these discussion questions? Any other discussion questions that y'all have that we could discuss?
Sarah, do you see this question in the chat? How to connect outings to advocacy? Do you want to share, since you all have been doing such a great job of that?
Sure. I mean, we haven't had much of an opportunity during the pandemic to really do much in the way of outings or in-person events, much like the rest of the world. But prior to the pandemic, we were doing our best to match advocacy with outings. With our public lands work, for example, the Delaware Water Gap, the recreation area up in northeastern Pennsylvania along the middle Delaware section, they were considering creating an entrance fee for folks who would come to the park. And it's a very popular park. It's like 2 hours away from New York City. It's maybe 3 from Philadelphia. It gets millions of visitors a year. And a $25 entrance fee to a park that had such high volume and people used daily, if they lived in the area, was a real barrier to use, and everyone was pretty much against it. So we did a lot of advocacy around the entrance fee. We had hikes in the park that would highlight, you know, these are areas that would be impacted. We did a partner hike with an environmental education center that is situated within the park that would have been severely impacted. And we use those as a tool to get folks out to the public comment meetings. Going forward, another way that we're trying to tie advocacy into outings is we are going to be doing a lot of work around Pennsylvania's bonding regulations. So bonding is kind of like a security deposit that oil and gas companies need to pay before they create a well in Pennsylvania in case they go bankrupt or abandon the well. We then have that security deposit to help pay for closing it. But the bonding amount in PA is like ridiculously low. It doesn't cover the cost. And so taxpayers have to make up the difference to close these wells. So we're planning a string of outings in the fall to take people out to sites where there are abandoned and orphan wells within the state, show them how to identify them, take pictures of them to see like if there's any corrosion or any leakage, what tools to be used to see if there are methane leaks from these wells, and how to log them, because there's a lot of these wells that are still unlisted on the DEP's website. So we're going to be using those oil and those orphan and abandoned well outings to tie in with our ask to increase the bonding amounts. So you can tie an advocacy action to pretty much to anything, or think of an outing to go along with any sort of advocacy act. In the Northeast, you know, there's been a lot of movement around the Keystone Sanitary landfill that's going through an expansion process right now. And so offering outings or around the landfill to show off, you know, its impacts to the community. You can see the landfill pretty easily from some of the trails around the area. So just thinking through those types of things, or with outdoor access, trying to think through perhaps inviting your elected officials or your council people to come out to an outing to talk about like transit inequity, or if there's something at a particular park that you want to highlight, you can create an advocacy action for that. Like if there's a park that doesn't have any, like if you wanted to go simplistic with like a recycling program or something in a park that doesn't have recycling, you can go and do a cleanup there and show all of the recycling that could be, you know, collected. So there's tons of ideas.
Oh, go ahead, sir.
No, I was going to say, I was just flagging Fawn's comment. We did an advocacy action with kids to write postcards against plastic. We didn't have an outing attached since we did that in 2020, but we connected with people via Zoom and YouTube on that. So yeah, that was a cool program. But go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, no, that's all. Oh, go ahead, Fawn. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add, the postcards that were sent out from the library were like 56 postcards from the library. And I think, Sarah, you had other places that you gave out postcards. So I think we did a good reach there.
Yeah. We've been lucky to have a good partnership with the local library systems up here. We've done some cool stuff with them. So we did postcards with one of the other libraries too. Fun.
Yeah, I was just going to share one of the things that we had a national campaign that's still running where, you know, I mentioned the Every Kid Outdoors program, where we actually worked with the Obama administration to establish it, to give fourth graders the pass. And twice during the Trump administration, they tried to end the program. And we had been collecting postcards from children across the country It's just a simple postcard that said, "I love my every kid in a park pass because," and we had given it out to any partners of ours who were leading Every Kid Outdoors outings and asked them to have the kids fill it out. And we were able to deliver a stack of 1,000 postcards from children across the country to Secretary Zinke. We kind of cornered him. He did not know that was coming during a meeting with military children back in like 2 or 3 years ago. And he had to continue the pass. He said he publicly promised the kids that he would. And so we were able to use that, even though that wasn't, what our initial purpose was. We were just kind of collecting testimonials for a time when we might need them. And then we did, and it was amazing. And so we still have that postcard campaign running. We don't have a specific need for it right now, but things like that are really easy for kids to do. If you're an ICO, even it doesn't have to say, "I love my every kid outdoors pass." It could just say, "I love getting outdoors because," and one day we could bundle those together and share them with a decision maker. I'll also just share another example out of LA. I talked about the Transit to Trails work. The coalition in Los Angeles, the Nature for All coalition that we actually helped to start, Sierra Club actually helped to start, and now is a big coalition. It was their work on piloting these transit to trails ideas that led their congressman, Representative Gomez, to introduce the Federal Transit to Trails Act. So it very much was a local idea that became this federal legislation. And now they are hosting Congressman Gomez on an outing in the August recess, and they're going to go and look at go and do some of these public transit routes together with the congressman. So I know Sarah mentioned that, but if there are opportunities to invite, your federal or your local elected decision makers out to see your work and build relationships there, that can be really, really helpful for future advocacy efforts. And we are thinking our leadership team, which Tom Torres is on it. He's not on the call tonight, but we have been talking about creating an Outdoors for All webinar on outings to advocacy specifically, and building tools for this very thing. So we haven't gotten as far as developing it yet, but I do think by the end of the year, we will have done one training that we can share with you all and invite you all to attend.
That would be great, Jackie, and I'll make sure that everybody gets an invite. It is getting close to 8 o'clock now. Normally after we're done with our presentation, I stop recording and we allow time for open conversation, because sometimes folks don't like to talk when the record button is on. So one last thing that I have before I stop the recording for the evening and let y'all do whatever you want to do on this Wednesday evening. As I said in the very beginning, our August call is being canceled. Summertime you should be able to relax and enjoy your summer. So we're going to pick up our discussions in September, and we will be having another special guest speaker on September 8th at 7 o'clock. And I'll send out all of that information later on.